Is Resilient being removed when we get the New World expansion? There is some evidence that suggests yes. So let's talk about why I am even talking about this, and then the impact that this will have on the game if it does come into fruition. So basically Dave said this.
Any plans to reduce, simplify, remove the ward system?
Yes. No, we've heard the feedback loud and clear. We agree with it. We think it's overly complex. It creates too much of a gear chase, and a chase that's not fun, right?
Yeah.
Like what we've talked about is like the classless system in New World is one of its greatest strengths, right? Like the ability to experiment, try different builds, like super, super fun. But the problem is people are so occupied with getting banes and wards and resilient sets for PvP, they can't enjoy the fun stuff.
Yeah.
So
now, whilst the question is not actually directly answered and directly related to Resilient, that does sound like Resilient may also be on the chopping block. So basically they get asked, are you going to remove Ward and Bane? And the answer is yes, we're going to remove Ward and Bane. And then they say we're moving away from these kind of things like Wards, Bane, and Resilient is mentioned. So it's not like directly 100% confirmed that Resilient's on its way out, but that is strongly hinted if you could ever get a strong hint. That sounds like a yes, Resilient is going without actually saying Resilient is going. So let's assume for a minute that it is, because if it's not, then this whole video then could just end right there and then, and that's not what's happening. So Resilient right now is a little bit weird. It's basically a mandatory perk if you want to do PvP. Most people have 5 out of 5, maybe worst case 3 or 4, but you really want 5. It's just 2 required, I guess, in that sense. The point is, you are then basically playing the game as PvP with 1 less perk than the 3, because you need that one to be resilient. So mandatory perks, probably a little bit weird. However, I have to say, I wasn't necessarily against the idea of keeping PvP and PvE gear separate. Other games have done that. I think there's actually a legitimate argument there to say sometimes it can make sense, because what can happen, you can basically end up with a situation where you have to do PvE to get the best PvP gear and vice versa, and then those groups might not actually want to do that. I do believe that most games you should actually be able to get most of the content or most of your gear doing the content that you like. So if you like PvE over PvP, you should be able to get pretty much best in slot just doing PvE. I don't mind a little bit of needing to do the other type. I think sometimes that can be a bit healthy, but in the main you should be able to get what you need just doing the thing that you want to do, within reason, obviously. So I didn't really mind this because it sort of eliminates that problem, but if they remove Resilient, I'm completely on board with that as well. Now they do actually, earlier on in the video I think, they talk about how they are still going to be keeping PvE and PvP perks, and if anything they sound like they're actually going to be pushing that a little bit further to make those gameplays a little bit more interesting and still balanced. Now, how that will look, I don't really know. Obviously, we do have some PvP only perks right now. Maybe they'll just sort of keep with that, or maybe they'll actually make a PvE only perk as well. I obviously have no idea. I sort of suspect they might do PvE only perks, because we're going to need something possibly at the minute to replace Bane. Ranged weapons in expeditions aren't really going to be used if you don't have Bane, so I don't know, we'll see what we get there. My worry is though that you might end up with effectively the same situation. If there's a PvP perk that is so good that it's stronger than all the rest, and maybe you want to 5-stack it, then that will become the mandatory perk and you're sort of back to where you were. So they need to maintain the diversity without basically messing up the balance, and I think that's going to be a little bit of a tricky thing for them to do. It's possible that they'll just make every single perk either PvE or PvP. I mean, that could happen. I wouldn't necessarily be against that, but it sounds a little bit weird to me, because otherwise you're going to end up with a situation where if you have PvP gear, maybe you can do PvE and vice versa. It really depends on how strong they push some of the PvE versus PvP perks. I think a lot of people don't really just want to have the one set where you have like the best in slot set and you do your PvP in it and you do your PvE. I actually don't mind that as an idea, but they have to be very careful with that. It's also possible that they'll simply do like a resilient potion. I don't really want them to go ahead and do that in the same way that I'm okay with that in expeditions. I think a resilient potion would just feel a little bit bad. Popping one every outpost rush, yeah, I don't like that idea at all personally. And one thing that this whole change means, both the ward, Bane, and maybe Resilient, it sort of changes how frequently we're going to have to get gear. And the balance of when you get your good gear, how long does the good gear last? Yeah, there's a whole lot of questions there. Personally, I would be in favor of them absolutely decreasing the quantity of gear that you do get, but maintaining the like percentage that you get that is good, if that makes sense. Because the ratio to good gear to scuff gear to me is absolutely bonkers and I absolutely hate it. But there's a bigger question here. If you do remove these wards, banes and resilience, what is stopping people getting best in slot very easily? Or at least a lot easier than what we traditionally had? And for that, it all goes back to the point of we need a better system for getting the gearing. I'm in favour of them removing ward and bane for sure. Resilient, I'm on the fence, I don't really care one way or the other. But I'm only in favour of doing that if they then make the system of getting gear a lot better. Quite simply, what we have had for the last 2 years has been pretty damn bad. So if we see some improvements to there, they make it more fun, I'm completely on board with that. If, on the other hand, I had to do the same thing that I'd done previously, and I just had to repeat it at a higher gear score, basically without ward and bane, it'd be better, sure, but it would still be pretty bad just because of the way that you get the gear. And there's an even bigger question that I'm not really going to touch upon here, is I do wonder if we are going with horizontal or vertical progression. At the minute, we're in this sort of like weird hybrid. All of your gear from launch effectively could have been useful all the way up until the expansion. Yes, you would have had to like improve the gear score, but that's not necessarily a problem if you had 590 plus gear. And yes, the meta has actually changed, so what's been useful has sort of moved and the goalposts have moved and stuff like that. But in theory, you could have got 600 gear score gear at the start, upped it to 625 and still be rocking it to this very day. Some people out there are probably still in void bent, and that's okay in a way. But as I said, it begs the question, what are we doing progression wise? Are we having vertical progression but only every expansion? Or are we actually going to move away from that and maybe we're actually going to get vertical progression every season? I'm not necessarily against a gear chase like that. I think some of that can actually be fun. As long as it's done in the right way, I think it can be fun. My only worry that if you do a vertical gear chase like that, you have to worry about your casuals a lot more, which then basically means you have to make getting gear easier, but then you still have to reset it so that everybody can sort of start afresh and get that good feeling. But then some people get tired of just running on the treadmill because everything that you do for 3 months feels a little bit pointless. So there's a very weird fine line there, and I don't know how to walk it necessarily if I was the New World devs right now. They could flip-flop and go exactly like Guild Wars 2 and just say, okay, we're changing the gearing system, but we are actually aiming for horizontal progression. If they want to do that, I'm on board with that. I would say that I only really know Guild Wars 2 that has done anywhere near to achieving that. I think maybe I'll be online might actually do that as well. But there's not many games that do that. If New World wants to add itself to that list, then let's do it and let's do it properly. So if Resilient gets removed, there's a lot of questions that might come from that, beyond the fact that they'll probably have to change the way that crits work because you'll die a lot quicker and time to kill will change and stuff like that. I trust that they're smart enough to like realize that. Like, let's put some trust in AGS that they will think about these kind of issues. But yeah, like when you listen to what they said, it sort of sounds like Resilient is on the chopping block as well. I sort of missed that in my absolute hype that Ward and Bane was going. I know season 2 is literally right around the corner. However, if I'm honest, all my thoughts, all my efforts right now, pretty much going into the expansion. It's what gets me really excited. Season 2 is like, it's alright. It's mid. That's a reference to the people on my stream. Never mind. Thank you to my YouTube members, and if you want to come over and watch me on Twitch, there is a link in the description below. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.